Hey, I'm Max, and in my previous video I quickly made a game where two armies of aliens fight each other using different weapons and powers. That was cool and all, but the aliens' AI was way too simple and boring. They all just ran to the middle of the map and shot at every enemy in sight using random powers. In my video before that, I made a game where the enemies get smarter using a machine learning algorithm called NEAT, and of course using a neural network. This gave a very natural feel to the AI, unlike the hard-coded AI, which felt very unnatural. So today I'll try to combine the two by making the aliens be controlled by a neural network using the NEAT algorithm, so hopefully that will give them more natural behaviors. First, I had to transfer all of my neural network code from C# to C++, because I made it in C# in Unity, but my alien game is in Unreal Engine, which uses C++. The two languages are pretty similar, so it wasn't too hard to transfer, but I did have a few problems at first that took me quite a bit of time to fix. But once it was done, I just had to set it up in my Unreal Engine project, and it was ready. The scale of this neural network is unlike any I've done before. My previous game with NEAT had 11 inputs and 2 outputs, meaning the AI had to take the 11 variables as input and produce the 2 outputs, which was the direction that the AI was going to move in. This time the AI has 14 inputs and 14 outputs, being the movement direction, aiming or not, shooting or not, using each power or not, so it's going to take a lot longer to train. Let's launch the game and see how it looks with no training. Okay, well, the result is terrible as expected. Let's make it train a little bit to see if it learns. The task that this AI has to learn is pretty complex, so I helped it a little bit at first by giving it only the position of the nearest enemy, but eventually I could even give it the position of all enemies in sight, and the position of all allies as well, so it can learn to deal with all that data. But I didn't do that yet because that would make the inputs around 100 in size, which would be way too long to train. After a bit of training, it learned a bit, but it was still terrible, and I realized that it ran into rocks often because I forgot to give it as input if there is something in front of it or not. So I added that and tried again. I tried doing fast training by ending the game after 1 minute and picking the AI that hit the most enemies and less allies. But by doing that, the AIs in the front had an advantage because they would never hit their teammates by shooting forward without thinking. But the ones in the back, if they shot forward without thinking, they would hit their allies. And also, a team could decide to all run away together and still have one of their best AIs be picked with a score of 0. So I decided to change my training strategy from the best of one team to the best of both teams. So a team running away and getting a score of 0 should not be picked anymore. I also removed respawns for now, but again I faced the same problem. Over the next 7 days I tried many things to get it to work, but it seemed like nothing was going to fix it. The AI went to the middle and shot randomly around, and then the next round it would shoot in the air and move to the edge of the map. It made no sense, honestly I wanted to give up. But I kept trying, and I ended up over the days fixing some bugs in my network code, trying again, changing settings, trying again, and eventually I realized that I had simply given it bad inputs and outputs. For example, I would give the AI as input the angle to the target, but I would use the output as the aim direction. So I would basically be telling the AI, the enemy is 20 degrees to the left, so what coordinates do you want to aim at? Without knowing where you're currently aiming, that's impossible. That's like saying, I need $5 more to buy this game, how much does it cost? Well, how much money do you have, you know? The AI simply didn't have enough information. So after fixing that and messing around for a few more days, I finally had a good base. The AIs walk towards the enemies and shoot. Unlike before, the AIs actually turn around after crossing the enemies and keeps aiming at them. You can even see them sometimes use random powers. That's great. But obviously it could be better. The AI could aim to increase its accuracy and keep a distance to the target to avoid getting shot as much. So now I'll remove all of the things I did to try to fix my network over the past 7 days, like making them all pistols and spawn in a line, and I'll also re-enable the damage. I also have to make the enemies a different color so I can tell them apart, because right now if I play against it, I can't even tell which one is which. So now if I play against them, it's an easy win for me, which is actually okay for the start of the game, but they have to learn to get better. The main risk for me is my allies that keep shooting at me because they haven't learned yet to only shoot when the enemy is in sight. The enemies move somewhat randomly and their aim is bad, but I'm still glad to see they are able to aim a little bit at least. Now let's see if they get better over time. I'll let them train for a bit by making them gain fitness every time they deal damage to an enemy, and also lose fitness when they take damage themselves or damage a teammate. After training for many hours, they finally got pretty good. They run towards the target and shoot. However, they learned that when you aim, your accuracy goes up, but your speed goes down. So to keep both the accuracy and the speed, they managed to toggle on and off the aim really fast. That is such a tricky move. I should have expected something like that from the AIs. So I had to add a timer to toggle aiming, so you can only toggle it twice a second to prevent them from using a cheap trick like that, and I trained it again a bit more. They eventually started to aim continuously, and they also started to turn around enemies while shooting instead of just running into them. Ideally, I would like them to learn to stop at the ideal range to shoot, instead of always moving up to the enemy or really close to it. And I also want them to learn to stop aiming and run when no enemies are in sight, because it's pointless to be aiming when there are no enemies in sight. Still, this is a lot better than my hard-coded AI. Each AI walks and aims in a slightly different location, which makes them feel a lot more natural. After a bit more training again, I tried playing against it. The result was pretty good. Those AIs feel a lot more natural than my previous hard-coded AI. The AIs have very subtle movement, and each one walks a little bit differently, so that makes it a lot more interesting for the player and less predictable. Also, they managed to learn to use powers like the fly power, and they use it pretty well. The game is a lot more fun to play than before. The AI characters now each have different behaviors and skills, and they can also learn to get better or worse, which means I could eventually add a difficulty that changes depending on the player's performance. That was pretty fun to do. In total, it took me about 2 weeks to get it to work, but I'm glad I didn't give up because the result is pretty fun. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe.